What's good, fellas? Welcome back to another episode of the Last Cut Farm Team podcast. I am the host, Chad, and today we're going to be talking about the whirlwind that was last week. Starting with the trades. I'm just going to get into it because there is a lot to talk about. Last time, we left off with Jazz just getting traded to New York and the prospect package we got back there. I do like the offensive profile of Ramirez. I honestly, I see him more eventually playing a little less than half of his games at catcher and eventually transitioning to first base. But when he's with Miami, I think a good, we'll call it 40% of his games at catcher, 30% at first, and 30% DHing, which I think we should have a second catcher on the roster that is a solid defensive catcher, which Nick Fortes is, and that might be a good pairing, Fortes and Ramirez. I'm going to get more into when I think he debuts later on. Moving on, the first trade of deadline day was actually Brazoban to the Mets for Wilfredo Lara. I just kind of see Lara as a depth piece. I don't really see him being anything crazy. I mean, he might, come up and be a serviceable player. I don't know. I haven't done a whole lot of research into him. That might be something for a later date, a deep dive on that. But Trevor Rogers going to Baltimore for Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers. I have been vocal about wanting Kobe Mayo. We got the next best thing in Connor Norby. I think I wanted Mayo so much because I really liked his size and power profile, and Norby is, a bit more undersized, profiles at second base. He's a solid offensive profile to play as second base. I don't dislike the pickup, that is for sure. I definitely like Norby. I'm excited to see what he can do. I think he does debut this year, Norby. I think he's a September call-up, and I think he ultimately wins the starting second base job beginning next year. I think that even if he doesn't impress in September this year, spring training next year, he will. I like the return for Trev. Again, thanks, Trev. Thank you, Huascar Brazoban. Thank you to everybody else that got traded. Miami is one of those teams where the fan base doesn't have the luxury of seeing guys get signed to long-term deals, with the exception of the star player, a la Sandy Alcantara or Giancarlo Stanton. But it feels like whenever we do sign a guy to a long-term deal or at a high-price contract, they end up getting moved 2 or 3 years later. It almost feels like a curse. That said, I'm not hoping Sandy gets traded, at least for a year or two. I want him to have more time in Miami. I want him to serve out his contract and us trade him in the last year if we're going to do it. But we know ownership. We know what the team looks like. We know how it's going to look going forward. And it's just reality. We just got to live with it. Let me go back to Trevor real quick. He debuted for Baltimore the other night and had one of those games where I think the long ball got to him. I think a couple, 2 or 3 home runs were hit off him, and it was, from what I could tell, kind of a typical start for him where he gave up a couple early, kind of locked in a little bit in that mid area of the game, and then slipped up later in I think it was the 5th or 6th inning. He had another home run or a couple runs scored on him. Ultimately, I think it was 4 or 5 runs scored on him, which is, disappointing, but you hope he picks it up from there. You hope it's just like the stumbling out of the gate and finding his stride moving forward. Anyway, moving on. Tanner Scott and Brian Hoeing got moved to San Diego for Adam Mazur, Jay Bashirs, Robbie Snelling, and Graham Pauley. Pauley's debuted this year, but his profile kind of shows him more as a reserve guy. He doesn't really have a true defensive home. I'm sure he would argue with that. He probably would call himself a third baseman or a second baseman. I think he'll find his niche, but I don't really expect him to be somebody that anybody writes home about. Snelling and Mazur are interesting additions. I like them for the lineup, or the rotation, sorry. especially Snelling. We're going to have, like, if you just look at our minor league system, our top 4 prospects are pitchers. That just speaks to how good this organization is with developing pitchers and choosing what pitchers to develop. I mean, if you look at our outlook for the next, 6 years or so, even if we move Sandy, we got Yuri, Noble Meyer, Tom White, Max Meyer, Robbie Snelling. That's 5 right there. That's a pair of lefties and 3 righties that are going to be solid. Then you also got Missouri. I don't know. I'm distracting myself because I'm looking at it with Sandy Alcantara at the head. But yeah, I mean, if you look at our pitchers, we got a couple dudes who are going to be good in the next foreseeable future. It sucks to lose Tanner Scott, but we were going to lose him either which way, so I'm glad we got some kind of return for him, and that's a pretty good return, especially with Snelling and Missouri working with Mel Stottlemyre Jr. We know how to develop pitching. We traded Josh Bell to Arizona for a player to be named later, and Cash, or we traded Cash to them for a player to be named later, which can't really speak on that because I don't know what we got back. I'm looking forward to seeing Josh Bell continue to play this year for a team that's actually in the hunt. Unfortunately, Braxton Garrett went from the 15-day to the 60-day injured list. Not part of trades, but it happened on the 30th, and I'm seeing in the transaction history. So that's disappointing. We traded Brian De La Cruz to the Pittsburgh Pirates for a couple guys, a right-handed pitcher, Juk-Suk Shim, or Jun-Shuk Sim, and third baseman Garrett Forrester. I can't say I'm underwhelmed by the package. I just don't know enough about it. You kind of figured we weren't going to get a whole lot back for De La Cruz, which is why I wanted to hold on to him for another year or two, let him kind of blossom into the player I thought he could become, but I kind of understand that they wanted to move him now and get pieces to add to the puzzle. But I don't think either of them were rated in the top 30 prospects, so it is what it is. But that's the majority of the moves. I will add, because I'm recording this on the 3rd, I saw that on the 2nd, Baltimore they DFA'd Kristen Pache, who I spoke about last week, and Miami claimed him. So a guy who, when I, was playing MLB The Show religiously, it was The Show, was the bane of my existence, has now become a Marlin. So I'm excited about that. He's had his struggles offensively, but even having him as a 4th or 5th outfielder as a defensive option, the man can ball. He is a center fielder through and through. He's fast. If we can just develop the speed when it comes to base running and just have him work on bunts, like, you don't need to go up there and hit 50 home runs a year to be, effective in the game of baseball. That's the beauty of baseball. You can have all kinds of archetypes, all different types of players, positions. You have guys that look like, Daniel Vogelbach, and guys who look like Jose Altuve, playing with dudes who are 6'7" and 280 pounds like Judge. It's the beauty of the game. But I'm looking forward to seeing what Pache can do, and I'm hoping that Miami just doesn't see him as a flash in the pan, like, the rest of this year, fill out the roster. I kind of want him to stay, because he has arbitration eligibility next year, and he's not going to be a free agent until 28. So if we could just, I don't think we're going to have to pay him a whole lot in arbitration. I'm not sure how that process works, but I know that it's based off of performance, and his performance has been middling. So I feel like, Miami could get away with not paying him a lot, and he would fill out the roster for the next couple of years until, the team is really ready to field the team. And if he does start performing, then he's a trade piece. So it's kind of a win-win for Miami to keep him on the roster. I like him being there, which leads me into a trade that I think we should do, because I was going through and putting together kind of what I think the roster for next year would look like, and part of that was trying to eyeball who's getting traded. And I feel like definitively Jesus Luzardo is getting traded. But I wanted to talk about where he goes, why I think he goes there, and what I think we're getting back, or what I would want to get back. So when you're looking at the breakdown of how the teams have done this year by WAR, I referenced this last week. I used Baseball Reference. I refreshed it today. One of the teams in the middle of the pack is Boston when it comes to starting pitching. The Red Sox WAR by pitching, like starting pitching WAR, is 2.9, which is 10th in the league for starting pitching, and overall it's 1.7, which, I mean, it's okay. It's middle of the pack. 2.9 is halfway decent. You're upper third of the league. But when you look at their actual rotation, one of the guys that they got, their only lefty in their starting five right now is James Paxton, who they just traded for. So prior to that, and he's, I don't want to say the weakest arm in their rotation, but I think he is, per Fangraphs, the weakest arm in that rotation, which kind of speaks to the lefty. Like, they have a hole at the left-handed starting pitching. I feel like you add a solid left-handed starter in there, and you have a monster rotation. If you look at per Fangraphs, shout out Fangraphs, they have their 5 starting pitchers right now are Tanner Houck, Nick Pivetta, James Paxton, Brian Bello, and Cutter Crawford. Their power rankings, respectively, are 13, 57, 127, 87, and 43. So you have 4 guys inside the top 100 ranked currently. And that's, a subjective ranking, but ranked currently. And the only guy who's not is a left-handed starter. Now, I feel like Luzardo is an upgrade over Paxton. And maybe I'm a little biased because I'm a Marlins fan, but I love Jesus Luzardo. I would rather us not trade him and sign him to a long-term deal. But I know that's not going to happen. And he's going into his last year of arbitration eligibility. So after this year, he's a free agent, which is why I think Miami, there's no way he starts the year with Miami. We move him in this offseason because the allure of, one last year of control is too much for the Marlins to not try to take advantage of. If we went into the year, we're risking injury and everything else. So the trade that I mocked up involves obviously the Marlins and the Red Sox. And I originally wanted to ask for Kyle Teal, but the more I thought about it and the more I looked at it, the Red Sox are not going to trade Kyle Teal. He is too good a defensive catcher. Plus, we got Agustin Ramirez, but my thinking was it would be a good player to pair with Agustin Ramirez, especially if we're using him primarily as a first baseman DH, and he is essentially the backup catcher. He would provide that off day for Kyle Teal. And you could even potentially put Teal in as a DH to give him rest on those days, to rest his legs or whatever. But I think he's a little too protected, a little too important to the organization. I will say Miguel Bleis is kind of the other guy I was looking at. Fits the Marlins profile, 2026 kind of projection. I think he's in high A right now. Yes, he is in high A, part of the Greenville Drive at the moment. Big power guy, solid arm, solid fielder. He's currently a center fielder, but I feel like you could easily slide him over to right field and he would fit in very well there. He's, a plus defender in center field. If you move him to right, he could be a Gold Glover. He has a good vision and recognition on the bases and awareness, and just essentially just a smart ball player who can hit the ball hard, hit the ball far, and hit the ball out. My initial thought was they would not want to trade him because of the fact that he's a right-handed hitter, right-handed power hitter who's fast, and he could play, pretty dang well in Fenway. Especially with the monster there. If he starts lifting balls, he's going to hit 50 a year. He might even go 50-50. because he's in the minors. He's got 32 stolen bases right now in 76 games. You double that production. That's 64 stolen bases in 150 games. Yeah, no, he's a freak. But I was thinking he might be available, especially if you pair him with some lower end prospects, guys who could pan out, but kind of have lower ceilings. But I like Blyce. I feel like they have another outfielder already in Roman Anthony above him, so he's another power guy who is absolutely a monster. With Roman Anthony above him, plus they already have Yoshida, O'Neal, and Duran already there. He's going to be blocked for the next couple years at least. Plus, with Roman Anthony there, that's going to prevent his opportunities even more. I just see Blyce as available. I think the opportunity for Miami to get him is there. I think that would be a good move for us. Blyce is the number 4 prospect in the Red Sox system. I would put Blyce in a package with Alan Castro, who is the 11th prospect. Switch hitting outfielder, just kind of plays all fields, but he's a solid piece, and he would definitely help shore up the Marlins farm system more. And just for good measure, I would throw in Connolly Early, who is a left-handed pitcher. He's the 25th ranked prospect in their system. I like his profile. He's 22, 6'3", lefty, not overpowering at all, but has a plus changeup, and Mel Stottlemyre Jr. loves plus changeups. With that plus changeup, he would play very well. I could see him being a Braxton Garrett type, except with a plus changeup instead of that cutter dominating. Although he could develop another pitch like a cutter to go with everything else. I'm not sure exactly how, his mix of pitches would work out. He has that about 90 mile per hour fastball. He's kind of the guy. I like him because I don't think he's going to get hurt. I think he's the kind of guy who is going to fit into a rotation and give you 25 to 30 at least per year. I think he's a guy who is going to go out there and collect innings, and he might give you an ERA around 4, but he's going to give you innings, he's going to give you depth, and I can just see him working out, especially as we start to move other higher end pitchers. If there are injuries, you don't want to be caught with your pants down. I think having Early would be a good move. With those 3, I feel like they would be willing to listen on Luzardo. Blyce would be, I would need him. I could drop Alan Castro, but I would definitely want Blyce and Early. I think that if they are almost there, I would be willing to throw in Nick Gordon. The reason why is Gordon is a utility player. He would help provide some depth in the outfield for Boston and infield if they need it. Plus, he's just an all-around good player. I love Nick Gordon. I don't necessarily want to see him go, but with Skip Schumacher most likely on his way out and Jazz being traded to New York, he was brought in by those 2 guys, I feel like. Skip wanted him because he liked his profile. Jazz wanted him because they're best friends. I also think it would be poetic to have Nick Gordon on the Red Sox and Jazz Chisholm on the Yankees. That said, if you move Nick Gordon, it would free up an outfield spot for Victor Mesa Jr., who I believe will debut this year, or Christian Pache. Plus, you're going to have Stowers out there. You could have a Stowers-Myers-Sanchez outfield, or a Stowers-Pache-Sanchez outfield. Or, again, you could bring up Mesa Jr. and have Stowers, Mesa Jr., Sanchez. I like Sanchez and Stowers out there, but kind of pairing them with somebody else in center field. I just don't think Nick is the answer. He's not the answer long-term, especially because he's going into arbitration next year. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, Pache and him are on the same level with that. They're both going into arbitration next year. But I think that Gordon's going to have a case to argue for more money, so it would make more sense to move Nick Gordon, and I feel like the Red Sox have more of a need for Nick Gordon. But if you could do that and make that trade, then you would have Blyce. You would have an outfield of the future with Mesa Jr. in left, Dylan Head in center, and Miguel Blyce in right. And then you have other guys in the system to kind of help out there. You'd still have Dane Myers. You could have Jesus Sanchez still around for another couple of years, although Sanchez is going into arbitration. So you gotta, if we're gonna lean into the rates model, you really need to understand when players are going to be moved. And I feel like adding Nick Gordon to the pot with Jesus Luzardo is more than enough to net that package. And I really do like that package. We got a lot of infielders in the packages we got at the deadline, which is a good thing. But now it almost feels infield heavy. If I'm looking at it, top 4 are pitchers. And then you have second baseman, catcher, first base, third base, pitcher, and then a couple outfielders, which are Victor Mesa Jr. and Dylan Head. Then you got more infielders. You don't have another outfielder until the 16th and 17th, which is Alderman and Marcy. I think if you add Blyce in there, he immediately slots as probably the third or fourth, maybe the fourth prospect in our system. I like that fit with us, mainly because I like him as a prospect. But moving on, couple minutes left. I just want to run into a way too early guess at what our starting 5 looks like next year and our batting order for opening day in 2025. Yes, I've kind of pivoted into more of a Marlins heavy podcast. I'm a baseball fan at heart, but the Marlins are the team of my heart. So I am going to focus on the Marlins until I have guests coming on here that are Tampa Bay Rays fans or people from other organizations or whatever else. I'm gonna focus on the Marlins because that's what I care about. That's what I enjoy, and I'm doing this because I enjoy it, not for money. I don't really care. I'm just gonna talk what I talk. Anyway, the rotation next year, starting rotation, I see it as Sandy Alcantara, Yuri Perez, Ryan Weathers, Max Meyer, and Braxton Garrett, 1 through 5. The reason I have Brax 5 and not 3 is Weathers. He's just been killing it this year. I kind of see Braxton Garrett maybe not taking a step back like Trevor Rogers did, but kind of falling back to earth. He had a stellar 2023, and it was one of those things where I don't want to say I saw it coming, but I loved his profile. Nobody seems to appreciate the guys that are not fireballers anymore. And obviously 100 on the gun is fun to see, but sometimes you need a softballer, junk baller out there, like Beozo, who yesterday went out there and held the Braves to 2 hits over 5 innings, 5+. That's kind of what you need sometimes in the league nowadays. Because if you go up there piping 100 every time, somebody's going to touch it and it's going to go yard. And if they're seeing 100 every night, they're going to get used to it. And then you're a one-trick pony and everybody knows the pony. So I like that's why I want early. That's why I want Connolly early. I feel like he could have that same profile or a very similar profile. But I do think Braxton Garrett is a serviceable starter. I definitely see him as a mid to back end guy, which is perfectly fine. He's a serviceable MLB player. And then you have if somebody goes down with an injury, you have Munoz, you have Beozo, you have Mazur, you have Snelling. I'm sure he's almost ready. He's estimated 2025. I don't think he debuts next year or this year. I think he debuts maybe sometime late next year, like September call-up or post-All-Star break, something like that, unless there's an absolute need for a left-handed starter. I just don't see him getting rushed at all. But that's the rotation. I don't really want to touch on the bullpen, to be completely honest, because it's just so unpredictable sometimes. But the lineup, I can see a lot of things happening. One of the things I can't see happening is Davison De Los Santos and Agustin Ramirez cracking the opening day roster. I just don't see it happening. They're going to manipulate their service time. If they come up quickly, if they are killing it in the minors, they are going to be coming up in May, because there's no way that they are going to essentially burn a year I don't think either of them debuts this year. I think they debut next year, mid to late in the year. I just can't see it happening. So I think that what does happen is the lineup kind of looks like this. Xavier Edwards leading off, obviously switch hitter, fast. He's kind of been doing that already. Second, hitting second, playing second. Connor Norby, I think that even if he doesn't impress in September, he's going to impress in spring training next year. I think that he finds his way into the 2-hole because he's just kind of an all-around hitter. I feel like he would fit in there. Hitting third, Jesus Sanchez. I, again, love his profile. He is probably the player I'm most excited to watch most days. Hitting fourth and DHing, I would have Jake Berger. Again, his power profile is huge. He would be a great cleanup hitter. He's a stereotypical cleanup hitter. If he can just kind of get on base more, that would be even better. Which, I mean, he's been doing a decent job of that as of late. Hitting fifth and playing left field, I have Kyle Stowers. He has a power profile. He could be a 25 to 30 home run guy, kind of a left-handed De La Cruz type profile. And De La Cruz struggled his first year, but picked it up later. I could see him hitting, kind of middle of the order. Hitting sixth and playing center field, kind of contingent on the trade. I would either have Nick Gordon playing in center field, hitting sixth, or if Nick Gordon got traded, probably Otto Lopez. We'll go with the Nick and then without the Nick Gordon lineup. So with Nick would be hitting sixth, playing center field. Seventh would be Otto Lopez playing third base. He's a utility infielder. He's got to find his way in the lineup. He's been playing well this year. I don't think he, loses a starting spot. I think that's a good fit for him. Hitting eighth, playing first base, I would have Troy Johnston. The reason I think he's going to be on the roster next year is he's a lower prospect who maybe doesn't have a high upside, but he is major league ready. In my opinion, he is major league ready. He needs to make his debut. We need him at the major league level. I could see him being if not a starter, a major leaguer for a couple of years until we trade him. I could see him being a useful piece. He's a left-handed bat. He's decent with the glove. Not oversized, but he does the job. He's about the same size as Davison De Los Santos. So he's essentially a left-handed version of Davison De Los Santos without the power. I just like his profile. I just feel like he's overdue. He's overdue. He's been hitting, I think, 280 in the minor in AAA this year, and last year he hit over 300 in the minors. And he hit like 20 some odd home runs last year. This year, power numbers have decreased because he's stopped kind of forcing the issue. But I think he's earned enough for a call-up. And if he doesn't get called up now, when is he going to get called up? So I think he starts next year at first base. And then hitting ninth, catching Nick Fortes. Without Nick Gordon, if we do make that trade and he's part of it, you have X hitting first, playing short, Norby hitting second, playing second, Zeus hitting third, playing right, Berger hitting fourth as a DH. Fifth is Stowers in left. Sixth would be Otto Lopez playing third. Seventh, Troy Johnston playing first. Eighth, I'd have Nick Fortes. And then ninth, I would actually have Victor Mesa Jr. Rounding out the order. I like his profile, Victor Mesa Jr. He also is another guy that deserves a call-up, deserves his opportunity, and he'll get it sooner or later. It's essentially it. And then off the bench, you could have Dane Myers, Christian Pache, Hensley if he plays well, Tristan Gray, Manuel Rivera, Vidal Brujan, De Los Santos would get a call-up eventually. Ali Sanchez could be the backup catcher until Agustin Ramirez makes his way to the majors. There's a whole host of options. I don't necessarily know if I'm sure Pauly would be on or around the roster at some point, Graham Pauly, but I don't think he'd be starting. If he does start, he'll be starting at third, where Otto Lopez was this year, or in my early lineup. But yeah, with that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about. I appreciate y'all being with me. Yeah, man. Y'all have a good one. Till next time.